I'd like to call a special meeting of the Budget Review Committee to order. It's Tuesday, March 4th, 2025 at 7 p.m. in the Aldermatic Chamber and duly noticed in 2 places, including the city's website, in accordance with the requirements of RSA 91-A:22. Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Tim Senate.
Here.
Alderman Derek Tevogt.
Here.
Alderman John Sullivan.
Here.
Alderwoman at Large, Shoshana Kelly.
I'm here. I'm in this room alone. I can hear everyone, and I am attending remotely because I had childcare issues.
Alderman at Large, Laurie Wilshire.
Here.
Alderman at Large, Michael O'Brien is in attendance. And our chair, Alderman Richard A. Dowd.
Present. Okay, the first order of business is public comment.
Laurie, can you hold for a second, just a little housekeeping for the record. We are also joined by Don Enright, Treasurer and Tax Collector.
Present.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Lori Ortolano, 41 Berkeley Street. Thank you for the new time clock up there, very visible. A couple things that I'm hoping to learn tonight or have questions asked about. I received bank statements from the city that they use to deposit the expendable trust fund money and capital reserve fund money in. In particular, I was looking at the art center. So they have a bank account that's titled City of Nashua Expendable Trust Funds. That account, it was announced at the Board of Trustees meeting by Trish Klee and I think Tim Cummings that that account does not earn interest, but it does. It earns just under 3%, 2.75, 2.9, 3% interest. So the money that's put in there for whatever amount of time before it's transferred is earning interest. When they, and I don't understand, it was raised by Ms. Klee that, you know, for some reason, we can't transfer the quarterly payments from the art center into the maintenance fund so that it can earn interest and be in a better yielding account because that's our policy. I called Manchester. I said, what do you do if you have a capital reserve fund for maintenance and you get a quarterly check? Do you leave it there for a year and then transfer it, or do you transfer it quarterly? And they said, we transfer it right away. It goes right into the dedicated account according to the RSA that it's supposed to go into. Why don't we do that? Because we'd earn interest. And what bothers me is when the city puts it into that dedicated bank account, City of Nashua ETF account, and it's earning interest, they keep the interest. When they send it over to the account, the city is keeping the interest, I guess, for the general fund. Now, that account had something like 11 million, maybe 22 million, a lot of money. So the interest over a year, if it stays in there and is not portioned out, would be earning maybe $1 million. Why so I don't know, but is that interest dedicated to all of those other ETF accounts? Because it didn't go to the Art Center Capital Reserve Fund. They didn't get, I don't believe they got an interest payment included. So, and Ms. Klee said,
1 minute.
there's no interest being earned. But there is interest being earned. So I'd like to understand why we can't move the money quarterly, why we can't get the best yields. That maintenance account is not a lot of money. That maintenance account to do maintenance for the art center is really limited on costs. We're gonna find ourselves not having enough in there to do real maintenance for the art center. And we're gonna have to offset it with other money. I really believe that, because we're not getting that much in the 7-year contract for contributions from food, ticket sales, booze, that kind of stuff. It's small and costs are high. So we should get every advantage we can from that money, and I believe we should get every advantage we can from all of our trust funds. So I would love to see what your process is and an explanation on any policies we have regarding the transfer of this money and compliance with the RSA. Thank you.
That's a good question, except I don't think we're covering capital reserve funds today. We're only expendable trust funds, right? All right.
The list you gave me includes all the capital reserve funds. Oh, that's what.
Yeah, well, it was pages in the book. But the
Unreal.
meeting was called, and the request for the meeting was called by Alderman Tebow and Alderman Sullivan, to go over the expendable trust fund accounts, which we will be doing this evening. We are going to go through them. Dawn has done extensive research on them and has hopefully all the answers to all of the questions. We'll find out. One thing I want to state is we can't take any action this evening. Anything in the expendable trust funds that needs to change will have to go through legislation. And it would take, and there are some of those accounts that can't be touched because they were established either by a court order or they were established by donations from somebody for a specific purpose, in which case we can't, as a Board of Aldermen, legally change that. So she's going to address all of these, but I guess I'd like to start with what Alderman Sullivan, Alderman Thibodeau have, Tebow, had in mind for this meeting. Alderman Sullivan?
Oh, thank you. I had requested this, and I appreciate Alderman Tebow for kind of jogging my memory when we were going through it, because as we were talking about the trust funds a few weeks back, when the whole trustee of trust funds and interest bearing and whatnot came about, it did remind me, first time I was on the board when we were going through the budget, that we have a considerable amount of money tied up in these funds, and I didn't know really anything about them. I mean, I understand that there are resolutions that are signed, that are established here or passed by this board that establish the fund, and that there is a pretty good explanation as far as the purpose of the trust fund. But I just wanted to know really expendable trust fund 101, and to understand better this money that's there, how it earns interest, how we can track these, and do the different department heads that have the right to expend these accounts, are they aware of them? And do they meet about these funds, and do they know that they have these resources available to them in order to run whatever board that they're on? So that was really it.
Okay. Tebow?
Thank you. Yeah, and along the same lines with that too, I agree with what Alderman Sullivan was saying, but I was just looking at these and I was like, are departments utilizing them to the best of the ability of that department, depending on the needs they have, right? And how are we utilizing them? Are the departments, every time they have expenditures that fit into these categories, are they looking at this first? Are they not? Are they putting things in the budget instead? I mean, some of these things have been on the books for 100 years, others maybe 2 years, right? So, we keep accumulating them over time, and at some point you may want to go back and say, okay, that one from 1940 no longer needs to be done. I look at this one, for instance, I tried to put in legislation last week, and they said, hold off until this meeting. Katrina relief. Like, Katrina's been gone for a while, there's no money in it. So are we really using it to help people through Katrina when that was so many years ago? And how many people were placed up here, for instance? So I look at that and go, we probably don't need that one anymore, right? So, it's cleaning up the list a little bit, it's making better utilization of it, and understanding from our perspective what money's in here and how we can use it for the departments that need it. Some don't have a lot, some have a lot. Is there stuff we can combine so they have more? So I was just kind of looking for that kind of angle on some of these things.
Typically, a lot of these were set up so that there was a place when somebody wanted to give the city money, it was a holding place for it, so it didn't get into the general fund. I'm sure Dawn's going to explain that in a minute. Two that I can think of is Nashua High North, Nashua High South have places where graduates can put money in to help the school. But there are a lot of others. Did you have another question, Alderman Sullivan?
Thank you. To the point that you made when you kicked off the meeting about changing anything, I understand we can't change anything tonight, but to Alderman Tebow's point about the Katrina Fund, if there is a fund that isn't either funded or current or just doesn't seem to make sense and there's no money in it, is the proper procedure to pass a resolution to delete that account? Would that be the proper process that we would go through?
That's the only way.
But we would have to pass a resolution to
Yes.
undo the resolution
Yes.
to get rid of the trust fund?
Yes.
Okay.
And I may be wrong, and maybe Don can answer this. I think legal's waiting so that they could do several of them in one piece of legislation,
Yeah.
rather than writing, depending how many we come up with, we don't want to overtask the legal department, but Don, if you'd like to kick off from there and explain, you've been doing a lot of work on this, so.
Thank you very much. Yes, I have. I feel like I've been living in trust fund world since I got here, but here we are. First, I would like to pass out a list of all the trust funds that we have in the city, and it gives you balances through January 31st. And it's categorized by department.
Thank you.
Don, do you have that electronically?
I do not.
Is it two? Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you.
I apologize.
Can you leave one here for her at her desk? Thank you.
You going to display anything, Don?
Yep, I'm going to.
So there'll be things displayed that you can see, Shoshana.
Thank you.
So kind of stemming from the last presentation that I gave on trust funds in general, you have expendable trust funds and non-expendable trust funds. In the expendable trust fund portion, you can have a city-created expendable trust fund with public monies. You can also have an expendable trust fund in donated monies or gifted monies in a will or any type of gift instrument by an individual. The non-expendable trust fund is a trust fund that has been gifted to the city or willed to the city that says you can only spend the portion of income that is earned on that trust fund. So to answer the first question, do these trust funds earn interest? Yes, they all earn interest, and monthly, the interest is allocated to each individual trust. So when you have the trust funds here, you see how they all have a 4-digit number. Typically, your 7-0 numbers are your expendable trust funds created with public monies, meaning the trust funds in which the Board of Aldermen have passed a resolution to put these funds aside. Typically, your 75s will be your expendable contributions, but I will say I have seen some city trust funds in the 75 category. Your 8-0s, that will be your non-expendable trust funds. An example, if you look down at the Woodlawn cemeteries, you see 8028 and 8028.8. When you see a .8 account, that is your non-expendable portion that cannot be spent out of at all. So one of the questions was, do the departments know about these funds? These funds are set up on our financial system, Lawson, and each department can see the balances available in these accounts. They're categorized by department, so the departments should have a good understanding of what is available to them. I know that several of the department's heads asked if they needed to be here to speak in relation to some of their trust funds. So they are aware that they're available. I have noted next to several of these trust funds, if it has a tick mark in front of it, you'll notice at the end of the description, you'll see a handwritten 0. Example, under Other Government, TF 187023, Green Team Trust. That has a 0 balance. That's on the first page. So if you look through, you can see there are several of them that have a 0 balance. I would recommend that we look at these and determine if it has had any activity other than interest being allocated to it over the past 5 years. Because it's 0, I would assume it has no interest. The last page of the list of trust funds, it's page 1, 2, the third piece of paper, you'll see scholarships. We have many scholarships for the high schools. I did not go through those because several of those carry a 0 balance and they're funded yearly to be able to issue a scholarship. So because we have so many others to take under consideration at this time, I would recommend that we stay away from the scholarship funds at this time.
One quick question, the ones that have marked closed, do those no longer exist?
Under the scholarships, I
Yeah.
am not sure. I'm assuming it does mean that. But I can get that firm answer for you. So then, the very last page of your packet, you'll see a list of 6 trust funds. These trust funds had very small balances, so I pulled them aside and pulled the resolution and what the description was for it, because we may want to consider closing these because they did not have much activity in them.
Again, looking at that last one, 7571 Nashua High School South Class
So-
Trust Fund, is that,
That sounds like it's the one that you were describing, that is a placeholder for donations to be able to help
right, as the
the
classes go
graduating
along, if
class.
they have money and want to donate it to the school, that's the place to do it. There's one for North, one for South.
Okay. That's,
Hold me down.
Oh,
Can't see me, right?
can't, yeah. Alderman Wilshire?
Thank you. Also on the last page, it's the NPD, the last, second to the last, NPD Historical Committee Fund. Maybe we should reach out to the police department and find out if that, before we close it, if
Oh.
that's something they would want us to close, or they intend to keep it open for some reason.
Dawn?
that is a good recommendation. And also, I did want to note, the reason I supplied it to you in a department fashion for the most of it is so that you can talk to each of the departments that have the use of these funds.
Right, I think we ought to check with each department before we take any action on any of them. Alderman,
Thanks,
Tebow?
Mr. Chair. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend closing anything without talking to a department first. So I got so many questions, I think, from seeing this new sheet here. So part of it is that there's many more than I even knew existed, because what's in our budget book, even though there's stuff that is zero in here, not everything from this is in this budget book. And so, you know, I just look at the first page right off the top, you mentioned one. Well, there's zero, but there's zero for Katrina, and that's in the budget book. So I don't get any kind of example of what the green team is, right? Like, so Katrina told me exactly what it was in the budget book, but I don't know what the green team is. Like, what is that? Like, so there's lots on here, and I'm just looking through it. And scholarships, I get that we probably don't want to touch them, but I'd be curious if there's stuff in them. Like, I'd want to know, like, what line items for all these things. Like, it just seems like there's a lot more than, and I know I'm not near the mic, but I talk loud. I know it seems like there's a lot more here, and so now my head's spinning around looking
Right.
at this going, what? Excuse me? Like, and so, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what to say. I just, why are they not in the budget book if they're trust funds when we have a budget book that says, here's your trust funds? I don't get that.
Dawn?
I wish I had that answer for you. I do not have that answer. It is something that was not there.
Who would that be Director Cummings, who's on, up there on our TV
Budget
screen?
books, I think, was put out by
Probably John
John
Griffin.
Griffin.
Okay.
Yep. I will
Yeah.
work on getting that answer for you.
All right.
If any of the division directors want to chime in on anything, just put your hand up and Alderman Sullivan.
Not a division director.
Yeah.
And just for prepping for tonight, I went through and I printed off, because the handout that we got was basically just a print off from the budget book. So I wanted to see what the current balances were. And I printed off, it's 8 pages. It's the summary listing on the city website. And to Alderman Tebow's point, as you were mentioning, okay, let's just latch on to this green team trust. That isn't even listed on any of these 8 pages. So there are trust funds that aren't even listed here, never mind in the budget book, from what I could see. So that's a question, why those aren't there. Just in general, the funds that I counted up, we had 163 total funds. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different buckets. And the total of all those funds on these pages total up to $128 million. That's a lot of money. And the largest one that I saw was the BPW pension fund.
Over 50.
At $55,783,881, according to this. The question I have around that, is that funded directly from employees and then it goes directly into that fund? It does.
Yes.
Okay. Now I'm going to jump around.
That would be one that we can't touch.
Nope, I'm not looking to touch it.
Bless you.
You had mentioned that the .8 trust fund, and I'll specifically say under the Woodlawn Cemetery, you say that, and I don't know how much is in it, but the .8 trust fund, you can't spend money out of it. So my question is, why would we have it? Why do you have a trust fund that you
I
can't
think
spend
I can
money
answer
on?
that, because they don't spend any, they're not allowed, or they don't spend any, I don't know which of those is true, on the principal. They only use the interest, and it's to maintain the cemetery. That's why when we don't bring them in for budget, because they're not usually asking for any money other than benefits and money for their employees. But as far as the cost of maintaining the grounds, comes out of their trust fund.
Can I follow up then?
Sure.
So is that .8, that's the principal amount, and the interest that gets thrown off from that account goes to fund the other funds? Is that what happens?
Dawn?
What happens with the cemetery perpetual care account, when a lot is sold, the monies that are received for that lot get put into this account.
Okay.
And that is the principal balance, and that gets put into the .8 account. Now, it is one account, and the balance in that account earns interest, but the interest is put into, example, the 8031 account, the interest would be put in the non-.8 when it's earned,
Oh.
so that it can be expended.
Okay. But only interest is spent, not principal. So the
Correct.
principal should never, only goes in one direction.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Alderman Tebow?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So an example of one I don't see anywhere in here, and it could be, and I'm just missing it. But, it's curious because we need these city hall renovations. So we have a trust fund for that, but it's zero. So who puts into that one? Is that us when we want to, or is it, like, who would put money in there? Is it just our board, or is that some kind of donation? Like,
Which one is that?
7021, it's on the first page, city buildings, city hall renovations. Like, we have no money in that, but it seems like something we should have money in.
Yeah, I've been doing this for like the 18th year, and when I had questions like that, you have to look at the legislation, and I believe, Don, correct me if I'm wrong, that legislation says that it gets funded by the Board of Aldermen, and sometimes it says on a yearly basis, and we don't do it, so.
I mean, that's what this is for. I mean, this was telling us like what the piece of legislation was and what the description was, but this one's not in there. Like, that's my point, like,
Yeah.
not all these are in there, so when I'm looking at these going, what is this one? I go to the budget book, and then it's the description and the RSA, or the, you know, O or R isn't in here, so it's like,
Good question.
you know.
Don?
That is a very good question. I would have to look at the actual legislation that dictates how that can be expended, but that is one I would highly recommend that we research and determine how we should move forward with it.
Okay. Are you going to keep a list of these? So-
Yep.
Alderman Sullivan?
Thanks. So there's, so not only is it in the budget book, but I know I said it before, but when I printed this off for balances on all these trust funds, the first two that are listed, 7020 and then 7022. So we're missing 7021. My only assumption is that it's a zero balance. And that's probably why we don't have it in there. But then again, when I look at this, there are other funds in here that are listed at zero. Oh, sorry. No.
No, you're right.
We have one in there that's at $1.70.
There's zero ones too.
Huh?
There's zero ones too. Katrina's zero.
Okay.
It's in the book.
Alderman Wiltshire?
So, under city buildings on the list we got from Ms. Enright this evening, 7021 is on there, it says zero, but the next line, city buildings, maybe it went in there, the money that was in the 7021 account, and just consolidated it to not just city hall, but city buildings overall?
Go ahead, Don.
Thank you. That is a good question. There is a balance in the 7078. If you look on the supporting pages behind it, you can find the balances.
It's 925,000.
I'm sorry?
925,000,
Yep.
yeah. So I'm wondering if they at some point just lumped all that into the city buildings account and just took it out of the city hall account and zeroed that one out. That's my guess.
Other questions? Yes, Alderman Senate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a little scatterbrained by all this, a lot of information at once, which, when you can do that to an accountant, that's good. So I'm just kind of going through this, and I'm kind of honing in on things that we hear a lot from our constituents. And one thing that I think most of my colleagues would agree with me is that we're often hearing about is sidewalks, sidewalks, sidewalks. I'm seeing 4 expendable funds in here with a total of over $500,000 in total between the 4 of them that are designated for 4 different quadrants of the city for sidewalk construction. It's a little surprising to me to hear that there's $500,000 sitting there that really hasn't come up at all in that discussion when we're constantly hearing from folks at the podium and in emails and phone calls about the need for sidewalk improvements. So I was wondering if you would be able to speak to that at all.
Don?
Thank you. I will make note of those accounts, and I will see if the departments are giving consideration to these accounts when it comes time for budget season, and what their plans are to utilize those funds.
Follow up?
I think Director Photo may have answered your question if you,
Yes, thank you, Alderman Dowd. I can speak to that. So we do have money in sidewalk quadrant funds. Unfortunately, most of the money is in quadrants where there is not a lot of sidewalk work that needs to be done. But we certainly will tap into some of that. And we have tapped into a large portion of that in the past.
Follow up?
follow up, Alderman Senate?
Oh, thank you. So, thank you for that answer, Director Photo. That clarifies things a little bit. I did do just a little side digging to determine who was the agent to expend that, and it looks like back in 2011, that was changed from the Board of Aldermen to the Board of Public Works. I'm wondering if, and again, I'll just be showing my naivety on expendable trust funds, but I guess two-part question. A, can funds be transferred from one to another for like purposes like that? And if yes, then would the agent to make those transfers be the Board of Public Works?
No, they cannot be transferred between quadrants,
Okay, thank you.
just to answer your question. Sure.
At one point, if we find accounts that have money in them that we don't know how they've been used or when the last time it was spent, we can certainly send questions from this group to that division that get an answer before we do anything. Alderman Sullivan?
Thank you. To the sidewalk question, and I know we have 4 of them, and I see that they are earning interest. And I'm just throwing this out here, food for thought, and certainly would discuss this with Director Photo and the Board of Public Works. But I mean, unless there's any type of logic behind it, wouldn't it make sense to combine that into one? You would gain more interest off of the higher dollar value, and you might be able to grow that account into something meaningful after a few years because you do have a larger balance, thus exposing yourself to better interest return.
Yeah, the other player in this question is going to be legal, is to evaluate the resolutions that set these up and whether we can do that.
Okay,
So that'll be a question that comes out of this.
okay.
Alderman Tebow?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So on page 3, Parks and Rec, so I get a couple questions on Parks and Rec. I probably have more than a couple, but I'm going to start with just a couple for tonight. So I see one, and this is probably near dear myself and Alderman Sullivan since we live over there. Roby Park has its own trust fund. Again, not in the budget book, but it's in this list, and it has a 0 balance. So why do we have a fund set up for Roby Park? Is this set up so that people can donate to it? If so, why isn't it in the budget book? Why isn't it, like, do people know about it, that they can? Like, if residents from Ward 8 and Ward 9 wanted to donate to it, they could? Or is this one we just don't need anymore, we'll just use the regular Park and Rec total? And that might be, this might be a question for Director Photo as well.
Director Photo?
You know, I don't know the answer to that, but I certainly can get it for you, Alderman Tebow.
Okay, thank you. Can I have a follow-up, please?
Yes.
I saw that we have sports tournament travel, and I saw that it was in the budget book, so I'm on board with this one. But I was curious as to, there's not a lot of money in it, but is that one that we really use anymore? Do we still have travel stuff for our city sports? And, you know, is that something that could go away, or is it still something that people donate to, or, because it's not a lot of money in there. I think it's a few hundred, if that, it's $100,000.
A couple $1,000. Yes, that is something that we continue to use, and we do replenish it from our budget every year. And in fact, very recently, we used it to help Little League go to the World Series. So that's the kind of thing that we do with that money. So it has been helpful.
All right. Awesome.
And I think that was just maybe a couple of years ago that we did that, 2-3 years ago.
Okay, that is helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
Alderman Sullivan.
It was mentioned in public comment about the Nashua Center for the Arts Capital Reserve Fund, which I do have listed here on my sheet, Fund number 7087, and then it's listed here. The interesting thing is, what was mentioned in public comment was, I mean, I would have to rewatch it, but I thought $11 million was mentioned. The balance that I'm looking at that currently, as of the end of January, was only $13,000, just over. So I don't know if I'm looking at the correct fund or not. But it is listed there, and I'm just curious how this fund ties back to the one that was being mentioned. Are we looking at the same one?
Dawn?
Thank you. If I recall correctly, the comment was stated about the bank statement. Now, many of these funds are invested in common, so the balance in the investment bank account would include multiple trust funds. And the interest is allocated according to the balance of each fund monthly.
Follow-up?
Follow-up, Alderman Sullivan.
Okay, so if I could translate. You basically put, and tell me if I'm wrong, when you say in common, you say you take all the money and you divvy up all the funds, and let's say this fund, Nashua Center for the Arts Capital Reserve Fund, represents 2% of the total. And then you take all the interest that's gained off of that lump sum. And what did I say, 2% hypothetically?
Yeah.
So then you take 2% of the interest and you slide it into the, is that how it gets apportioned?
Yes, it is.
Oh, so it doesn't really matter, my earlier question about if we combine the trust funds or not, because they're all combined anyway. Right?
I wouldn't say all,
Yeah.
but many of them are combined in bank statements, yes.
Okay, all right.
Alderman, oh. Director Photo, did you have another input?
I did. Thank you, Alderman Dowd. I remembered to Alderman Tebow's question why there's a Roby Park Fund. That is to accept donations from the Morin family, who have been incredibly generous and donated things like the shade sails and the playground surface and a number of other things at Roby Park. So that's what that fund is for, to accept those donations into.
Yeah, again, a lot of these are, somebody wanted to give us money for something, and we had to establish an expendable trust fund to put that money into, and you'd have to look at who the expendable group is. It could be the Board of Aldermen, it could be the mayor, it could be numerous people. So they're the only ones that can expend it. So, but we can't accept money from anyone unless we have an account to put it into. Just like when we accepted the money from the Stellas family for Stellas Stadium, that got put into, I believe. Well, actually, we were going to expend it right away, so it didn't get put in. Never mind. But if it was put in anticipation of something, it probably would have gone into the expendable trust fund. Alderman Tebow.
Thank you. And I understand that, like, I mean, that was a good explanation from Director Photo, but again, if it was in the budget book with an explanation of what it is, that we knew what it was, then I don't make that question, right? Because I could read where it came from and what it was. So if there was a way this time that we could have, you know, the list like this when it goes into the budget book with everything we have, whether it has a zero balance or not, so that we know that there's stuff out there that could have a balance at some point, right? Or if there's something that we may be able to take a look at and say, like this Katrina one, which just doesn't make sense anymore, we get rid of it, right? And to know, you know, clearly which ones we can spend, which ones we can't, who's over the, you know, the overseer, like obviously some of these are BPW, some of these are school board. whatnot, and we can't personally touch them here in the Board of Aldermen. I'd also love to look at Director Sullivan's trust funds and see if we can close all those. I'm just kidding, Director Sullivan. I'm just kidding. Relax, go back to.
I wanted to see if you were paying attention.
I was. I'm joking. Thank
So,
you.
to me, as I sat at home trying to recover from the flu, thinking about this, this doesn't impact the budget at all. So the first question I had is, why is this even in the budget book? After we get done with this analysis from this meeting, it probably should be a supplementary report. Can be put in the budget book, a separate, depends on what the budget committee wants to do, with a little more explanation and divide it into who can expend it. And I think that would make it a lot clearer, and we can bat that around and decide how we want to see it. But it would be much more useful to know what it was set up for, who can spend it, and you know.
How much?
How much, yeah.
It would help future boards too, so we don't have to, the future boards don't have to ask a lot of the same
Yeah, we've been trying to resolve
questions.
this issue for the last 18 years, so.
Shoshanna's got her hand up.
Yes, Alderwoman Kelly?
Most of my questions have been answered before I got called on, but I had a question. So you said it doesn't affect the budget, which I agree to an extent. But if we know what they are potentially used for, and we might be looking to, like, maybe we can't cover in the budget, are the department heads already looking at that? Or is that something as budget committee members we could be saying, hey, we're not sure we're gonna be able to cover the budget, but what about this trust fund?
Yeah, that's sort of an indirect influence on the budget, and I think one of the things is, we want to make sure that the division directors know which of these accounts they have, and if you, hypothetically, if you got an account in there for the library that's been in there and it hasn't been touched for 20 years and it's got money to buy books, why not? Why haven't we bought books? That
If I
kind
can
of
follow
question.
up, I know
Follow
that Megan has done a great job with the budget book, and it's gotten so much more detail in it. I've definitely looked at other city budgets and been really proud of how ours is put together. I'm wondering if it might be an opportunity to highlight like what funds sit under each department as we kind of move forward. Then we can at least see, all right, well, DPW has this many. Just a thought.
Yeah, I think separating it by who can expend it is the right way to go. Dawn, any thoughts on that?
Thank you. I am making notes of all of this so that we can make improvements to the budget so that it is helpful to everybody. You know, these recommendations are great recommendations, not only for the reviewing body, but also for the department heads that have to make these decisions. So thank you very much, and I am making notes of all of it.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if all of the divisions knew about all of these trust funds and what they were for and who could expend, and I think the information, if it was separated by who can expend the funds and we have a better explanation of what they're for, I still think it should be either in the addendum part of the budget book, if we want to do that, or a separate report. So we can go out from this committee, from the budget committee, and say, okay, Director Sullivan, you've got $40 million sitting in expendable trust fund. How do you want to spend it? Thought I'd get him. Anyway.
I'm thinking about the answer.
Alderman Sullivan.
Thank you. So just to follow up, the only way it would affect the budget is if we appropriated money out of the general fund to slide, like we do with the capital reserve fund, right? So if we take $1 million and we appropriate it, that's in the general fund to fund the capital reserve, capital equipment reserve fund, right? Then it would affect the budget, right?
Yeah, I think the way it would affect the budget here is if we found that a division had a whole bunch of money they weren't aware of, an expendable trust fund, and they could spend it for something that was in their budget, it would reduce their budget.
Right, but in the other way, if we decided to fund it, then it would affect the budget. It would come out of the general fund, wouldn't it? Because we're taking money.
If we mean, are you talking about taking money and putting it in the expendable trust fund?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yep.
That would affect the budget.
Okay. One more follow-up.
Follow
please.
up?
On the list I have here, it lists out, and I will use just the first one here that has expenses on it. The opioid abatement trust fund, ETF. On the January statement, or through January fiscal year 2025, we have expended $227,000 out of that account, and there are encumbrances of $5,000 on it. Is there a way to find out in any, not just that account, but any of the accounts, what they actually spent the money on? So Holman Stadium, if you go down a few, they spent $35,000 on something. I see that they spent $35,000 out of the trust fund. What did they spend it on?
Scoreboards.
Okay, well, that's.
I mean, I know that, but I know you don't know that.
Right.
So.
Well, how would I
don't-
find that out?
The expending authority, which is the Board of Education in that instance, would have to go through their finance committee and get a vote of the Board of Education to expend that money. The question is, that doesn't come back to us in any form at this point in time.
We just see a number.
We just see a number. And unless you were aware of what they're doing, you wouldn't know what it was expended for. And I'm not sure how easy that would be with all of these expendable trust funds. I'm hating to put more work on Dawn's group.
Yeah, I mean, so I sit on the Conservation Fund, which is meeting right now, and I didn't get to go to that meeting. But I remember that we passed some legislation in a meeting. We went through, and they had $1 million or something in their trust fund. And we went through and we itemized what they needed. So I knew just by sitting in on that commission meeting what was going to be spent. But if I'm just regular guy Nashua going through the website and I see an expenditure of $25,000 for the Conservation Commission, I would have no idea what that was for.
And I agree. I think to some extent, though, when the Board of Aldermen approves the legislation that gives them the authority to expend an expendable trust fund, it's up to them to be worried about the balance, and not us. The only way that we might get involved is if we see an expendable trust fund that hasn't been spent in 10 years, and it's for something that they're asking us for money in the budget this year that they could be spending out of their expendable trust fund, and that's when we ought to step in. Alderman Tebow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, I respectfully disagree a little bit there. I mean, generally, we are the stewards of the budget of the city of Nashua, regardless of what department spends, or, I mean, I'll tell you, my residents don't call up department heads looking at their trust funds. They just say, hey, you aldermen are overspending. So to a certain extent, we should kind of know. It would have been nice to know about the Holman thing. Holman, my question to you, Holman falls under school, it doesn't fall under Parks and Rec?
Falls under schools at the moment.
Okay. And my follow-up, which is a totally different question, but Infant Jesus, we have a trust fund. Do we have any money in that? Because they're not a school anymore, right? Or, so do we have money in that trust fund? I don't see a zero past it with a slash mark in it. It's on the school page. It's right under Bishop Girton, 917565-43. I mean, what would we do with something like that, that if the school was gone and say there's 93 bucks in it?
My guess is that when Infant Jesus was a school, that there were expenditures that were taking place through the Board of Education, and I'd go out on a limb and say the probably expending authority is the Board of Education, and if there's any money in it, somehow it probably should be zeroed out by legislation.
I would think. Maybe there's 10 grand in there, we can do something great with it.
Alderman Senate?
That actually kind of leads into something I was looking at here.
By the way, when you put your hand way up for this thing, it's hard
I'm
for me
only
to
so
see.
tall. Yeah, I'm trying. No, but that kind of leads into a question I had, sort of tongue in cheek, but yeah, I mean, you kind of fed into it with the, maybe there's 10,000 that we could find here. One that I just kind of plucked out of the budget book that really caught my eye was the Weavers Union Hospital Fund. Original purpose was for the erection and maintenance of a city hospital. City will petition to change the purpose of the fund due to the impracticality of the original purpose. Resolution passed 2/9/1892. And there's $9,400 in it.
How are we doing on it?
Yeah, I mean, in the grand scheme of the budget, 9,400 isn't a lot, but there's 9,400 tied up in a trust fund that was set up in 1892 to build a hospital. How do we reclaim that?
Alderman Dodd was-
Don, trust funds are a little tricky. Go ahead.
Thank you for that question. This gives me the opportunity to explain to you how we changed the purpose for a trust fund. That was a private donation, and the only way we can change that is through a process called Cypre with the filing with the Department of Justice. So we are actually in the process of doing a Cypre with the Department of Justice on that Weaver Hospital one. What we're looking to do is to change the purpose for public health in some manner, because you're not going to erect a hospital for $9,000.
No?
No, not in today's dollars.
Maybe a tent.
So we are working with the legal department to formulate a Cypre filing.
I wanted that to be a typo in it, for it to mean 1982, but I knew memorial existed already, so.
Alderwoman Kelly?
Yeah, mine is along the similar lines. I'm wondering if we, as a city and finance department, and, potentially Board of Aldermen, need to have a more critical eye about the types of funds we set up and what parameters are around them.
I'm not sure I follow. What do you?
So my question is to finance, are we being more thoughtful about what types of trust funds we set up? So instead of putting something that's only a trust fund to take, $3,000 to put in a sign that now then sits there, are we looking at being more thoughtful so we don't end up with thousands or however many we have that can't be touched?
Dawn?
Thank you. That is a very good question. I would hope going forward that we give consideration to that. I think this is a really good first step into looking at what we have and which ones we should be dissolving, should we be consolidating any. I think that's a very good question, Shoshana. Thank you.
Would it be possible, follow up, please?
Follow up?
Would it be possible to, I'm not trying to add more to your plate, I know you've got plenty, but maybe just, some considerations, even if it was like 5 considerations before you set up a trust fund. I know I've set one up for something specific, so just thinking there might be an opportunity to try to get ahead of it.
Yeah. Dawn?
Let me just make sure I understand the question.
Sure.
You're wondering if the finance department can take into consideration any resolutions that come forward and make recommendations in terms of wording to morph into other trust funds, or is that what the question was?
I think the question was if it would be possible to give guidance not only to aldermen, perhaps city staff, around, types of trust funds we'd like, things that we would prefer not to have, like it's only tied to this one person and this one thing, like just kind of like a primer around, if you're gonna go do this, here's a way that'll allow us to make it more flexible in the future.
Perfect. Now I understand the question. You're looking for some guidance as to what would be recommended for the writing of trust fund resolutions going forward. Perfect.
Yes, I'm sorry if I'm a little bit not able to fully express my questions, but thank you for getting it this time.
That's fine, thank
Going
you.
back to the, trying to get a handle on what was expended, perhaps one line in that addendum book we come up with could be what was spent in the last year on what. Because they don't have to come back to the Board of Aldermen to expend. If the expending authority is the Board of Education or the Board of Public Works or even the mayor and, some of them are the mayor and, I believe Director Cummings. It depends on what the trust fund is. And some of the Board of Aldermen, by the way, if we expend money, yes, Alderman Wiltshire.
I noticed that we have some people here from the Fire Rescue Service. I wondered if they were looking to talk about anything we might have on our list tonight.
They were just afraid they might lose some money, so
Well-
come on up and,
I don't blame them.
that's where all the division directors are online.
Business Manager Karen Condi. We just have two. Well, there's one with a zero balance that actually we weren't aware of because it's probably so old. The two that we do have been used recently. One is a fire emergency fund that is used in the case where we get towards, I would say, like the end of the fiscal year for payroll. If we had a lot of emergencies that we had to call people in for overtime, that's used for that. It started in I think it was about 2001 to 2003 timeframe. But we do use that. That is expendable by the Board of Fire Commission. We had to request it, I think it was 2 years ago. We didn't end up needing to use it because our payroll lines covered it. The other one that we have is, it's a PEIPP. That is where different organizations can donate to us so that we can do educational like seminars for the public, and that is used periodically as well.
Okay. Any questions for them? Alderman Tebow?
Thank you. Yeah, so, thank you, Mr. Chair. I assume the one you didn't know about was the Amherst Street Fire Station one?
That is correct.
Man, I see a zero balance. I was hoping there was like 10 million so we could fix that place up.
Yeah.
You know, it seems like that's the right.
Merry Christmas.
I mean, of all the fire stations, obviously that's the oldest, right? So I would hope that maybe someone set it up at some point because we knew we were gonna need to fix it up, but there's no money in it. So I don't know who is, because there's no information here, I don't know if we are supposed to, you know, put money in there, if someone donates to that, if there was a reason for it, or if it's one we just don't need anymore and we'll just fund it through the normal way of funding, you know, fire maintenance. So, you know, again, that's one I'm curious on as to, I'd like to see the RSA or our resolution or the ordinance, what was passed to set that up and why we, or a board had that in mind, because I'd like to, you know, maybe not need to be on the books, but maybe it should be used if it needs to be used. I don't know. You know, I just don't know why it's not in the, again, it's not in the budget book description, so I don't know what it's for.
Do you have a question for the fire department?
No, just in general.
You're just gonna let her sit down.
I'm okay if she sits down.
Before she sits down, there is also an expendable trust, not for you, there's an expendable trust fund for overtime for the police department that we have to occasionally keep refunding. If they run into a problem at the end of the year and they have to pay their officers extended overtime, they've had this account, I know at one point it was 10,000, then it shrunk, and they asked us to put 10,000 more into it, and we did as a Board of Aldermen. So that's one of the expendable trust funds. Question, Alderman Sullivan?
Actually, it was more of a comment that, you know, I'm not looking to, you know, end the meeting by saying this, but I'm wondering if, now that the request has gone out to the mayor to give us the budget earlier, and hopefully we'll have more time to look at it, it would be great, now that we have all of this information that we can pour through as we, for the run-up to the budget. My request would be, as the division directors are making their presentations to us about their budget, that perhaps they could carve out some time to address the trust funds that are under their department or under their charge. Maybe they want to make a recommendation, or maybe they want to let us know that in the coming fiscal year, they plan to spend X out of a trust or whatever. I'm just wondering if, instead of us looking at all of these, if maybe the department heads, since they're so well organized now, that they could go in there and just look at them and maybe take 10 or 15 minutes out of their presentation to say, here's, I looked at our trust funds, this is what we have, this is what we really don't need anymore on the go
Well,
forward.
I think now that we have them broken out by, it may not necessarily be by division, but by expendable authority, because we have some at the board aldermen are the only expendable authority. So, I don't know who's gonna look at that one, but, we probably as a budget committee ought to look at it. But I think, sending it out to them in advance, we may be able to resolve some of these things even before we get into the budget. But yes, we can ask them to do that. Alderman Tebow?
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Mr. Chair. I concur with Alderman Sullivan. I think, you know, like you said, now that they're grouped the right way and we can look into them a little bit more, I mean, a lot of open questions still about some of these lower count ones, and like to see some of that cleaned up. But, you know, I hate to micromanage the budget, but as great Alderman Senate once says, that's what we signed up for. You know, to be, like I said, stewards of the money of the people of Nashua, right? So it's our job to make sure that in a tight year where it's gonna be very tight, that we're trying to be very thoughtful and careful about how we spend money. It's gonna be a tough year. So that would be great. I think I don't have any more questions specifically about these. So I think we can, you know, like I'll follow up on some of the ones I've asked that we didn't have answers for, and I'll go through some of these ones that I've never seen before. But to the point of, we had a department that didn't even know they had one on here either. So I'm assuming some of the other departments probably in the same boat. So it'll be interesting to see each department follow through with their trust funds and take a look and see what they got.
Before we wrap up, how do we feel about having the expendable trust funds in an addendum to the budget book or a separate report?
Yes.
Yep. It's fine.
I guess two questions I got. Separate report or addendum to the budget?
Isn't it an addendum now?
It is.
Or is it like supplemental?
It's in
like
supplemental.
Yeah.
There's a whole
I
bunch of
want
things in
both.
there.
What's the difference?
Who wants both?
Who said
She wants both, Alderwoman Kelly.
Alderwoman Kelly, did you have something?
So what you're saying is a separate report, which to me says is a longer form, more in-depth description, et cetera, some of the things that we've been talking about tonight around how long they've been around.
And latest expenditures.
Correct. Addendum to the budget, to me, seems potentially less detailed, so maybe we need both?
Well, I mean, if it's a separate report, we just attach it to the budget book, making it addendum. I mean,
I'm into that.
so, and the budget book is kind of thick.
Gotta stand up.
Alderman Senate.
Yeah, I was just going to expand upon that and say, I mean, I think Alderman Sullivan's right. We have that as supplemental information in the budget now. I think the issue that we're discovering is that we have this, which is more comprehensive than what's in the budget now.
Mm-hmm.
So if we just get what we get now, but fully fleshed out, I think that would do the trick.
Yeah, I tend to think some of the supplemental data in the budget book sort of gets overlooked as we're going through the divisions. I'm just trying to make it stand out more.
Not the year to overlook things in the budget.
So we'll also put that in Dawn's capable hands, and I know that were you guys talking about some other changes to the budget book this year as well? Last year we made some changes, but we didn't realize what they were until we actually got the budget book. Can we, if there are any changes to the format, can we flush it out before we actually print it?
Yes, we will.
Okay. But I think one thing in the budget book is we tend to mix things together, like every division ought to start on a separate page, not have the division on one page and then you turn, it's just the paging of the budget book I found was not as conducive, especially if you're trying to separate it by tabs. And also the supplemental data sort of ran together. So each supplemental item in the supplemental data ought to start on a separate page. I'm getting nodding heads.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think I mentioned it before, that everybody on the budget committee should get a 3-ring notebook
Yep.
with the holes punched.
Yep.
That's very exciting.
What?
I'm excited.
Anything else that we want to bring up tonight before we set Dawn off on her challenge? No? Alderman O'Brien?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to make the motion that the meeting was, a motion to adjourn by roll call.
Okay, motion is to adjourn by roll call. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman Tim Senate,
Yes.
Alderman Derek Theobald,
Yes?
Alderman John Sullivan,
Yes.
Alderwoman Shoshana Kelly.
I had my hand up, so I just wanted to thank everyone for being here. It was a formative evening, and yes.
Thank you. Alderman at Large Laurie Wilshire.
Yes.
Alderman at Large Michael O'Brien votes yes, and our chairman Richard A. Dowd.
Yes.
Okay.
I almost wanted to give it a Lopez no, just. We're adjourned at 8:06 PM.